As the sun began to cast long shadows over San Francisco's skyline, the phone rang in Elizabeth Morgan's small apartment. Having just finished a day of meetings as a sales director for a medical device company, she wearily looked at the screen displaying the word "Mom." "Hello, Mom. I just got home," Elizabeth answered, cradling the phone between her shoulder and ear while pulling papers from her bag. "Elizabeth, Catherine's apartment rent is going up. The landlord is truly heartless." Patricia's voice was always designed to command her daughter's attention. Emergencies, family crises, most of them involving Catherine. Elizabeth took a deep breath. "How much is it going up?" $200. "Her new design work isn't taking off yet, and I don't know what to do." "All right, Mom. I'll send it over on payday next week." Elizabeth stood by the window, gazing at the setting sun. This conversation hadn't changed in over a decade. Since her father Robert's sudden death from a heart attack when she was 17, the family burden had rested on her shoulders. In college, she earned scholarships and pursued a career in medical sales, steadily building her career at a medical device company after graduation. A significant portion of her six-figure salary disappeared into supporting her mother and sister. She had put her own dreams second, living for her family. "By the way, how are things with Michael?" Patricia's voice interrupted her thoughts. Elizabeth's lips naturally curved into a smile. "Very well, actually." "Is that so? But I wonder if an architect like him really has a stable income. Catherine says artistic careers have their ups and downs." "Michael is a partner at a prestigious architectural firm, Mom." "He's stable," Elizabeth retorted as she began preparing dinner in the kitchen. Her relationship with Michael Hudson was the first thing she had done for herself in a long time. After hanging up, Elizabeth sat at the table and opened a folder containing 10 years' worth of bank statements. Her mother's mortgage payments, Catherine's art school tuition, health insurance for both, emergency expenses, everything was documented. The next day, Elizabeth visited her sister's studio during lunch break. Catherine had her hair messily tied up and stood in front of a canvas with a paintbrush in hand. Her work showed talent but had not achieved commercial success. "Beth, you came." Catherine rushed over to hug her sister. "Look, this is my new series. I'm calling it Harmony in Chaos." Elizabeth smiled, admiring the painting. "It's lovely. Do you think it will sell?" Catherine's expression clouded. "Art isn't made to be sold. But the gallery owner has shown interest." She suddenly changed the subject. "Did you hear from Mom? My rent is going up." "Yes, don't worry. I'll take care of it." Catherine shrugged with relief. "Thanks, Beth. You're always helping us. I don't know what we'd do without you." These words had been repeated hundreds of times, but expressions of gratitude were always followed by dependency. Elizabeth felt trapped in her family role, positioned as the irresponsible eldest daughter. Meanwhile, Catherine was treated as the artist who needed protection. That night, during dinner with Michael, Elizabeth unusually brought up her family. "I love them, but sometimes I feel suffocated," she confessed, looking up at the stars from their terrace table. Michael took her hand. "You've given more than enough. It's time to live your own life." Elizabeth looked at him. Meeting Michael had brought a new perspective to her life. For the first time, she had begun to consider her own happiness. "Will you meet my family next weekend?" Elizabeth asked with determination. Michael nodded with a smile. "Of course." Elizabeth raised her wine glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." At the upscale San Francisco restaurant Bluebird, Elizabeth held up a champagne glass. After 6 months of dating, Michael had proposed the previous evening on a hill overlooking the bay. An emerald-cut diamond sparkled on the ring finger of her left hand. Mom, Catherine, I have important news, Elizabeth said in a slightly trembling voice. Michael and I are engaged. A moment of silence followed. Patricia spoke first. Well, that's wonderful. There was a hint of hesitation in her voice. I'm just surprised it's so sudden. Catherine set down her champagne glass with a formal smile. Congratulations, Beth. Michael is a lovely man. We're planning the wedding for the fall. Just 6 months from now, Elizabeth continued, disturbed by their reactions. Of course, I'll need both of your help with the preparations. Patricia took her daughter's hand. Of course I'll help, but... She paused momentarily as if choosing her words. What about your financial situation? I mean, after marriage, will things remain the same as before? Elizabeth understood the unspoken question. Would her financial support continue? Both Michael and I will continue working. But since we'll be building a new home together, things might change a bit from before. Elizabeth chose her words carefully. Catherine anxiously looked at her mother. But we're still one family, right? That won't change, will it? When Michael returned to the table, the conversation suddenly brightened. Let's toast to our future, he said with a smile. Patricia and Catherine returned his smile, but their eyes were not smiling. From that day on, the wedding preparations began to face unexpected obstacles. First, Patricia arrived 30 minutes late for an appointment with the wedding planner. She blamed traffic congestion, but Elizabeth, who had come from the same direction, had encountered no traffic. Mom, is this date okay? Elizabeth showed her mother the venue's reservation calendar. Patricia feigned indifference and shrugged. If it works for you and Michael. My opinion doesn't matter anyway. Catherine's attitude also became more passive. Bridesmaid dress shopping was cancelled twice due to headaches, and there were always negative comments on invitation design proposals. Cold responses continued toward menu ideas from Michael's mother. Something's wrong, Elizabeth confided to Michael in his apartment 3 months into the engagement. It's like they don't want us to get married. Michael put his arm around her shoulders. They're just afraid of losing you. Time will solve it. However, time solved things in an unexpected way. The situation worsened. One day, the guest list Elizabeth had confirmed was changed without her knowledge, with names of Michael's parents' close friends removed. There was sudden confusion with the reception venue reservation. The worst incident was when Catherine accidentally spilled coffee on Elizabeth's pure white wedding dress. I'm so sorry, Catherine said with tears in her eyes. My phone rang while I was holding the dress. That was a $7,000 dress, Elizabeth said in a trembling voice. How could this happen? Patricia immediately defended her sister. It was an accident, Elizabeth. Don't blame her. You always expect too much perfection. That night, Elizabeth cried on Michael's chest. It feels like I'm being deliberately sabotaged. You're overthinking it, Michael said, but doubt had crept into his voice as well. 2 weeks before the wedding, Elizabeth went to her mother's house to retrieve something she had forgotten. Opening the front door, she heard her mother and sister's voices from the kitchen. Normally she would announce her presence, but hearing her name, she paused. If Elizabeth's wedding falls apart, she'll come to her senses right away, it was Patricia's voice. She has such a strong sense of responsibility that she'll come back to us. But if Elizabeth leaves, we can't survive, Catherine's voice was filled with anxiety. My design work alone isn't enough. That's what I'm saying. Just a little more. She'll be the family savior, as always. Just like before. Elizabeth's feet froze. Her heart pounded, and she felt dizzy. It was in that moment she confirmed this wasn't accidental sabotage. She quietly took out her phone and started a recording app. We didn't do the final check on the flower arrangements for the wedding. The wrong flowers might be delivered to the venue. Patricia's voice seemed to have a malicious smile behind it. Mom, this is a bit. Catherine's voice held hesitation. It's fine. She needs a reality check to understand what it means to abandon family. Elizabeth held back tears and stopped recording. Before leaving, she deliberately opened and closed the front door loudly and called out, Mom, Catherine, are you home? Her resolve solidified. The wedding would proceed as planned. And she would have an answer ready for their betrayal. On the wedding day, St. Mark's Church was filled with the scent of roses and anticipation. Autumn sunlight streamed through arched windows, illuminating the aisle decorated with white roses and baby blue delphiniums. Elizabeth stood before the mirror in the preparation room, examining herself. The coffee stain on her dress had been made less noticeable by expensive emergency cleaning. You're beautiful, said Carol, Michael's mother, gently placing her hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. My son is truly fortunate. Elizabeth smiled. Over the past 2 weeks, she had continued gathering evidence of her mother and sister's betrayal. Phone calls confirming invitation delivery mistakes, emergency contacts correcting misunderstandings with flower arrangements, and most importantly, the recorded conversation. Everything was in her smartphone. Ready? Angela, Michael's sister, entered the room. As Elizabeth's maid of honor, she had supported her throughout. Yes, I'm more ready than I've ever been in my life, Elizabeth answered meaningfully. Her mother and sister arrived late. Patricia wore a lavender dress, and Catherine was in the pale blue bridesmaid dress. Both wore fabricated smiles. Elizabeth, there's a last-minute problem, Patricia whispered. There's confusion with the reception seating chart. It's already resolved, Elizabeth responded calmly. Michael's uncle knows the hotel manager and took care of everything. A momentary look of concern flashed across Patricia's face. Oh, I see. The organ music resonated, announcing the start of the ceremony. Elizabeth took a deep breath and placed her hand on the arm of George, Michael's father, who was standing in for the bride's father. He was a gentle man who had just retired as a professor and had welcomed Elizabeth like his own daughter from the beginning. Your father would be proud of you today, George said kindly. Elizabeth nodded, fighting back tears. Thank you. The church doors opened, and all eyes turned to her. Elizabeth smiled and slowly began walking down the aisle. Michael was waiting at the altar. His eyes shone with love and pride. The ceremony was perfect. They quietly exchanged vows and rings. When Michael kissed her, the church filled with applause and cheers. Elizabeth thought to herself, this is the path I've chosen. And no one will ruin it. The reception was held at a luxury hotel downtown. Against the backdrop of the twilight city view, nearly 100 guests gathered in the elegant room. After dinner, it was time for toasts. Michael's father stood first, blessing the newlyweds with a heartwarming speech. Michael's best friend followed. Then Patricia stood up. Elizabeth straightened her back tensely. She gripped Michael's hand tightly. Everyone, thank you for gathering on this wonderful day, Patricia began in a strained voice. As a mother, nothing makes me happier than seeing my daughter's happy day. She glanced at Elizabeth but quickly looked away. Then, surprisingly, she beckoned to Catherine. Let me introduce my younger daughter, Catherine. Patricia placed her hand on Catherine's shoulder as she stood. She's the one who truly deserves to be celebrated today. She's our real family who has supported our household. A ripple spread through the venue. Guests looked confused. Elizabeth stared at her mother with wide eyes. It was an obvious lie. Catherine began to cry and was embraced by Patricia. Elizabeth has always prioritized her career. We've struggled to maintain our household while supporting Catherine's artistic talent. Even so, I'm happy we can celebrate Elizabeth's new beginning today." Elizabeth looked at Michael with disbelief. His face was red with anger, but he squeezed her hand and whispered, "Leave it to me." As Patricia returned to her seat, Catherine hugged her mother while crying and said, "Mom, thank you." They received awkward applause from the guests. Next was the bride's speech. Elizabeth slowly stood up. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were filled with determination. "Thank you all for coming today," she began quietly. "Michael, since you appeared in my life, I've started thinking about my own happiness for the first time. You and your family have shown me what real family warmth and support look like." She paused for a breath and looked toward her mother and sister. They both had visibly anxious expressions. "Family is complicated. Especially after losing my father at 17, I chose a career in medical device sales to support my family," Elizabeth continued. "I started working during college and continued providing financial support for my family after graduation. My mother's mortgage, my sister's art school tuition, health insurance for both, everything is documented." Tension ran through the venue. Patricia and Catherine's faces visibly paled. "A few weeks ago, I discovered that my mother and sister were trying to ruin my wedding," Elizabeth took out her phone, saying, "I recorded it as a precaution and connected it to the speakers. If Elizabeth's wedding falls apart, she'll come to her senses right away." Patricia's voice echoed through the venue. "I asked if the venue could be changed to another date. This will ruin the wedding. She's the failure of my life. I've always prioritized Catherine, and I can't stand her getting attention." The room froze. Sounds of surprise rose from among the guests. Patricia and Catherine turned ashen, at a loss for words. Elizabeth stopped the recording and quietly continued. "I love my family. That's why I needed to reveal the truth. Honesty and respect, not lies and manipulation, should be the foundation of family." She turned to Michael and took his hand. "From today, we'll build a new family. A family based on love and mutual respect." Michael stood up and embraced her firmly. "I love you," he whispered. Elizabeth's best friend Jennifer stood and began to applaud. Michael's family followed. Soon the entire room was filled with warm applause. Patricia and Catherine sat mortified with shame. Tears welled in her mother's eyes. Catherine covered her face with both hands. Patricia spoke in a trembling voice. "Elizabeth, for you to have such a recording, this is taken out of context." She searched for words and looked toward Catherine. "I don't mean to make excuses, but we were anxious about what would happen to us after your marriage." Catherine tried to stand up while sobbing but stumbled and sat back down. "Beth, I'm sorry. But what will happen to us if you leave?" Elizabeth maintained her composure as she answered. "That may be a legitimate fear. But it's not a reason to sabotage my life and happiness." Michael stepped forward. "Mrs. Morgan, Catherine. I love Elizabeth. She's an incredible woman who has sacrificed her life to help you. To deny her the right to seek her own happiness." He choked on his words. As the atmosphere in the venue remained tense, Elizabeth's best friend Jennifer stood up. She had been a witness to everything since Elizabeth's college days. "Everyone, I know how much Elizabeth has sacrificed for her family for over 15 years, Jennifer said powerfully. When she was in college, while other students were enjoying their weekends, she was working 2 part-time jobs. After graduation, most of her salary went to supporting her mother and sister." Next, Daniel, Elizabeth's colleague, stood up. "Elizabeth is the most excellent sales director in our department. She always talked about how important her family was to her. She made reservations at fancy restaurants for family birthdays and took time off to support Catherine's art shows. Patricia blushed and stared at the floor. Catherine continued crying. Elizabeth took a deep breath and stood up again. What I really want to say is that relationships cannot be built on lies, she put emotion into her voice. I've always done my best for my family. But as revealed today, my efforts and sacrifices seem to have been taken for granted. Michael's parents stood beside her supportively. Carol said gently, Elizabeth, from today you're a member of the Williams family. We cherish you. At those words, tears flowed from Elizabeth's eyes. She felt the unconditional love and acceptance she had sought for years. Patricia and Catherine stood up and began heading toward the exit in shame. Elizabeth watched their retreating figures and suddenly made a decision. Mom, Catherine, wait. They stopped and turned around fearfully. Elizabeth approached them. Tension in the venue increased. I don't hate you, Elizabeth said quietly. I'm angry and hurt. But today is the beginning of my life with my new family. I want to end past resentments. Patricia looked at her daughter with confusion. You, forgive us? The word to forgive is too simple, Elizabeth answered honestly. It will take time to rebuild trust. But I don't want to completely sever our relationship. Catherine approached her sister tearfully. Beth, I'm truly sorry. I lost my judgment due to jealousy and fear. Elizabeth nodded quietly. Let's be honest from now on. And we need to respect each other's boundaries. Michael came to her side and placed his hand on her shoulder. This is a chance to build a new relationship, he said gently. But I will never allow Elizabeth to be hurt again. There was an unwavering determination in his voice, despite its gentleness. Patricia wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. I made a terrible mistake. Elizabeth, I took you for granted. I exploited your dedication, she admitted honestly. What should we do now? First, respect my new life with Michael, Elizabeth said firmly. And I want both of you to make efforts to become financially and emotionally independent. I intend to provide appropriate support. But not the dependent relationship we had before. Catherine said with determination, I'll seriously consider the job at the gallery. The owner wanted to commercialize my designs. I've been refusing due to artistic pride, but... Patricia added, though I'm retired, there must be things I can still do. My friend Linda said they're looking for substitute teachers at the elementary school. Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope in their words. Though far from complete reconciliation, it might be the first step toward a new relationship. Then it's a promise, Elizabeth said, looking at them both. And tonight, let's celebrate this ceremony. This is my and Michael's special day. Feeling the atmosphere in the venue gradually softening, Elizabeth returned to Michael. He was looking at her proudly. You're truly a strong woman, Michael whispered as he embraced her. You had every right to be angry, but you didn't burn the bridges. Not completely, anyway, Elizabeth showed a slight smile. But I'll decide which bridges to cross. The reception resumed. The band played music, and the dance floor opened. Elizabeth and Michael gracefully performed their first dance. Over Michael's shoulder, she saw her mother and sister sitting in a corner of the room. They appeared to be talking quietly. After the dance, Michael's father George approached Elizabeth. You were wonderful, he said kindly. I'm honored to have a daughter like you. Thank you, Elizabeth replied with heartfelt gratitude. For the first time, she felt the love of a true father. As the night deepened, the tension faded. Patricia and Catherine left early, but after a brief conversation with Elizabeth. They had agreed to meet and talk the following week. Elizabeth and Michael returned to the dance floor, surrounded by friends. Her colleagues congratulated her, and Michael's friends welcomed her into their new circle. Any regrets? Michael asked during a slow dance. None at all, Elizabeth answered firmly. What happened tonight was necessary. The truth has been hidden for too long. What will you do now? I'll establish healthy boundaries, Elizabeth said. Not complete separation, but maintaining a healthy distance. And we'll build our own family. Michael gently kissed her hand. I'm honored to be your family. And someday, I'll tell our children what a brave mother they have. Elizabeth teared up at his words. For the first time, she felt her future was filled with hope. She was being released from past suffering. The road might be long, but she knew she was moving in the right direction. Late that night, in their hotel room, Elizabeth stood by the window, gazing at San Francisco's glittering night view. Michael approached from behind and put his arms around her shoulders. Thinking, he asked gently. Yes, Elizabeth nodded. Today, I broke chains I wasn't even aware of for a long time. It's frightening, but at the same time, I feel liberated. You're not alone, Michael turned her to face him. From now on, we'll walk together. Elizabeth smiled and kissed him. 1 year later, in a quiet residential area on the outskirts of San Francisco. A small garden party was being held in the backyard of Elizabeth and Michael's new home. Under golden-tinged trees, friends gathered to celebrate their first anniversary. Cheers! Michael's father George raised his champagne glass. Elizabeth and Michael, 1 year ago today, you made a vow to share your lives. I want to pay tribute to your courage and love. Elizabeth smiled in Michael's arms. The past year had been a time of change and growth. They had purchased a new house together, and both careers were thriving. Michael had received an award for designing environmentally conscious public facilities, and Elizabeth had been promoted to vice president of the medical device division. Above all, they had begun participating in community volunteer activities. Dedicating weekends to mentoring programs for underprivileged children, they were building a true sense of family and community. In a corner of the garden were Patricia and Catherine. The relationship with them had gradually but surely changed. Though not perfect, it was moving in a healthier direction. Patricia now works 3 days a week as a substitute teacher at a local elementary school. She had deeply reflected on her actions and started attending therapy. Beginning to understand how her toxic parenting and favoritism had hurt her daughter over the years, she was sincerely working on repairing her relationship with Elizabeth. Hello, Patricia approached Elizabeth. Her eyes reflected caution and respect rather than the controlling desire of the past. Lovely party. Thank you, Mom, Elizabeth smiled. I'm glad you could come. Catherine had changed too. She had finally taken a step toward independence, starting a full-time job at a design company. She had rented her own apartment and was covering her own living expenses. Making efforts to overcome her dependent personality and jealousy, she was exploring a new relationship with her sister. The shelves Michael designed are beautiful, Catherine said, looking at the bookcase in the living room. I wonder if he could design my office too. Why don't you ask him? Elizabeth replied. The former tension had eased, though it hadn't completely disappeared. As twilight fell and guests began to leave, Elizabeth sat alone on a swing in the backyard. Michael sat down next to her, holding 2 glasses of wine. Thinking, he asked gently. We've come a long way, Elizabeth said, looking up at the sky. It's not perfect, but so much better than before. Michael took her hand. You're amazing. Setting boundaries without completely closing the door. Elizabeth nodded quietly. Family is complicated. But I think a true family is one where we elevate and support each other. And that's what we're building, Michael kissed her. As the first stars began to shine in the night sky, Elizabeth felt a deep peace. She quietly observed the changes in her mother and sister while continuing to walk a path that cherished her own happiness. And now, she had become the protagonist of her own story.